Open your mind.
Good evening and welcome to Open Your Mind Radio. You have myself, Alan James.
And you have myself, Stephen George. Very good evening.
It's Sunday the 14th of July 2013 and the weather is been fantastic, hasn't it, Steve?
Absolutely. Alan was outside working on his tan earlier. No, we've had a brilliant week and it's even lasted into the weekend, but the sun is baiting down here on Walton's Mountain. A couple of chemtrails knocking about, but you know we can overlook them. But it's beautiful weather, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's really good, really good. Okay, now we were supposed to have Bill Maloney on the show tonight, but unfortunately, Bill can't get to a landline or Skype computer to actually come on the show, and he sends his apologies. So we're going to try and get Bill on next week, fingers crossed. But the guest that we had on for next week has been fantastic, and he was able to get on the show tonight, which is a chap called Patrick Kelly. We're going to be talking about all things free energy, so that's going to be very interesting. But what we'll do is let's go over and find out about the communication channels.
Okay, Mary, how can people communicate with us this evening?
The communication channels are email info@oymireland.com, by phone 046 927 1212, and you can also contact us direct through the OYM chat room.
Thank you, Mary. The OYM chat room, if you're listening to us on one of these other streams and you want to have a chat, post some questions to our guests this evening, just navigate to oymradio.com, and in the top left hand corner you will see the live chat button. You can log in there, and if you do want to give us a ring on the phone, if you're ringing in from outside the Republic of Ireland, don't forget it's 00353 in front of the phone number. Alan.
Steve, now we'd like to thank everybody tuning in and listening in to the show, because we know the weather's great, and you know we wouldn't blame you if you went out to the pub and got a nice cold pint and enjoyed the weather, because we don't have it very often. But thanks a lot for coming and tuning in, and especially hello to everybody on the chat room as well. Thanks a lot for that. Now, before we actually get the guest in, as I say, it's Patrick Kelly who's going to be talking all things free energy and other things as well. Just a couple of things we're going to catch up on during the week. Now, I don't know whether you heard, but there's a group of Irish tycoons set to sue the state over the Anglo-Irish shutdown. Now, it says here that the property names claim that the liquidation of Anglo means their loans are now null and void. Big names investors including Gary Keller, John Flynn and Barney Eastwood are among a group of 10 wealthy figures seeking to bring the Irish government to heel on NAMA and the Anglo legacy. They will argue that they claim is flouting of constitutional and competition law by the Irish government could render contracts with NAMA and the liquidated IBRC null and void, in the case being prepared for fast track at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. Well, to be honest with you, I think that's bloody good news, because if we can get 10 businessmen to take on the state with the money and wealth they have probably behind them, then that's going to be a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes without saying. I mean, for some of the names you just read out there, I don't recognise some of them, but there's at least one who I do, Barney Eastwood. I recognise that name. And I hope they take on the government, and I hope they win. I hope they set a precedent, and I hope this government that we have in at the moment starts to shake and topples off the pedestal that they've put themselves on.
Definitely. And you've got some news as well about rats leaving a sinking ship, I think?
Yes, the rats have left this sinking ship. Well, there's no ship. He's just messing. No, it's Lucinda Creighton, former Minister Lucinda Creighton. Seemingly she's entitled to, get this, €46,000 severance pay package on top of her TD salary after resigning over the government's recent abortion legislation. I mean, that's unreal. She's entitled to 46k on top of her 87k salary as a TD. That's crazy. That is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, the thing is, she's using the excuse that over the legislation regarding the abortion legislation, but I think that, there's a sinking ship, and she's the rat that's leaving one of the ships for her own career. I think she's just using it as an excuse, personally.
Well, when you look at the track record of the government to date, she's not the first one who's jumped ship either. There's been a fair few of them have jumped ship in the past, even in the past 12 months.
Yeah, but she's going to milk that and say she left because of morals and principles regarding the abortion legislation. And if she had morals and principles, with all the people struggling and people committing suicide over what the bank's done, she would have said something a long time ago. Fair enough?
Yeah, I won't argue with that.
Yeah, okay. So that's why I think it's not about morals and principles. It's she's jumping a sinking ship. She's a rat jumping the ship and she's using that as a crutch to actually leave, to make it look like she has some principles when she doesn't. Because if she did, she would have said something a long time ago. So that's what I think is happening there anyway. But anyway, how's your week, Steve?
Well, my week's been absolutely fantastic for many reasons. One being the weather, because it's beautiful when I get up in the morning, and the 60-minute drive to work in the nice sunshine is lovely, and the 60-minute drive home is also lovely with this beautiful weather. And then being able to come home and get your dinner handed to you and go out and sit out in the back garden and have your dinner. You know, it's just it's actually like being on holiday, so it is. But more good news this week. Anyone who was listening in last week would have heard us speak of Tony Rochford and the hunger strike. Now, Tony has, as in from Friday, yeah, I think it was going to say Friday night, but Friday has called off his hunger strike. He was actually taken back home to his place of where he lives in Trim, County Meath, and his doctor examined him, and I think the general consensus was that he had been, 24 days without food. He was just taking water, but hadn't taken nil by mouth, as they say. So he was nearing the end, I think, because he was starting to suffer some memory loss problems, and it was kind of felt that the best thing for him to do would be to come off his hunger strike. Now, obviously, Tony did say that he wasn't going to end the hunger strike, and he was going to refuse any medical intervention. But he did have a meeting, I believe, with, I think it was Ray Butler, who's a local TD in Trim, County Meath. And he also had word from on Taoiseach, Mr. Enda Kenny. There's other words I wanted to put in there, but I'll just say on Taoiseach Enda Kenny, that he was also going to meet up with Tony. They would discuss the issue. But Tony was actually interviewed. Now, anyone who's been a long time listening to the show will know that I don't listen to mainstream media. I don't listen to radio, and I don't watch television, really. But I was sent a message there last Friday to tune into a local Dublin station. They were actually interviewing Tony. Seemingly they had him on for 2 hours. I didn't listen to the whole broadcast. I only caught I'd say about the last hour and 15 minutes. But the interviewer, one Adrian Kennedy, was interviewing Tony. Tony, halfway through the interview, felt sick, so he had to leave. But there was another chap there with Tony by the name of Paul. And Paul was there kind of representing Tony as well until he came back in at the end of the interview. But the interviewer, Mr. Kennedy, he did have people ringing in, texting in, and sending in messages and tweets through the Facebook page, etc., etc. And even by the end of the interview, he said over 90% of the messages and calls that they had received had been in support of Tony. I think Tony, he didn't do himself any favours really by going on hunger strike. I don't know what long-term damage he may have done. However, he's one of the first that actually hit the mainstream media. Like a lot of the other people who are doing their own little things in their own little groups, a lot of it is, we see it on Facebook and we see it on the alternative media, but we don't see it on mainstream. But Tony has hit mainstream, despite the fact that TDs were going into Leinster House day after day after day, and they all completely ignored Tony and said no, they didn't know anything about any man hunger strike on any hunger strike. But I think the way it is now, he's called off the strike. It's hit mainstream. He's been on an interview. 90% of the people are in support of what he stands for. Maybe not the way he done it, but certainly what he stands for. But I do have to say, there was one lady on, and I found myself thinking, wow, she needs her mind opened, because she sounded like she didn't have any financial worries. She was obviously in a comfortable job, and she didn't really owe too much on her mortgage, and she wasn't really suffering financially from what I could tell. So she was kind of giving Tony a bit of a lambasting, saying that he was an idiot and how dare he do this and his health, blah, blah, blah. Tony did say, "Oh, are you a doctor?" "No," she said, "I'm not a doctor." Well, he said, "Well, then I won't be taking any medical advice from you." So she went on and on and on, and her points were all valid. I mean, I think she was wrong in what she was saying, but I could understand where she was coming from. She was probably at the beginning of the road to awakening, and it's only when you get so far down that road you start to view things a little bit differently. So I'm not gonna condemn the woman. Breda was her name. I won't condemn her. Yeah, that's right, Crown Copyright. She was Breda. I say I won't condemn her because her mind wasn't opened. She couldn't really see the wood for the trees. She didn't understand why Tony had done the hunger strike. But all good things come to those who wait, I suppose. So maybe in a little while, hopefully not too long, she will see the world as it is, and she will see the politicians for what they are. But yeah, anyway, look, I don't want to take up too much more time. There's a lot of information on the internet about it. If you just Google a Tony Rochford, Rochford, hunger strike, you will find all the information. But I say as in from yesterday, which was Saturday, he was on the protest in the Dublin city centre. There was a big protest there yesterday, and Tony was at that as well. So obviously he is regaining his strength, and fair play to him. And he's a hero in my book, definitely.
Good. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. Now, I have to apologise to the listeners that I have a bit of a tickle in my throat, and I have a little bit of cough, so I apologise if I have to duck away every now and again. But we will try and bring down the mic. But
well, other than your tickly throat, how was your week?
Well, we had the United We Strike marathon yesterday,
yes.
and Steve did come on. We had our half-hour show as usual, and if you go over to unitedwestrike.com, all the podcasts from the United We Strike show are there, and there's an OYM slot. And Steve actually did a great talk regarding Tony Rochford, and there's an extended version of that. So if you go over to unitedwestrikelater.com and listen to the podcast, Steve goes into more detail with that.
An extended version of my talk, is there?
An extended version of your talk.
My monologue.
Regarding Tony. But I don't really have much. The only thing I'm going to say is that we are looking to move away from Skype for obvious reasons. It's crap, basically. So there is another program out there called Uvo. So it's OOVOO.com is the website. And apparently there's a lot of people singing praises about it. So we're going to be doing some testing with it and try and move away from Skype for a lot of reasons. Skype, now that Microsoft has owned it. Now, we heard yesterday apparently that when Skype was, not owned by Microsoft, it was a peer-to-peer network. And I can definitely say that Skype is much better when it was that. But when Microsoft took over, they centralized it, and then it's just gone downhill since then. So what we're looking at doing is using a program called Uvo. That's OOVOO.com. And we're going to be looking at that, and you can do webcams and all that kind of stuff with it. So check it out on the internet, and tell your friends, because if it is good quality, then we'll move over to that. But that's all I'm going to say for Alan's week. So I think what we'll do now is bring in our guest, and we're going to be talking all things free energy. Good evening, Patrick. How are you doing?
Good evening. Thank you for having me on your show.
No problem. Thanks for coming on, Patrick. And I know it's a last-minute thing. I asked you to come on, and I know you're a very busy man, but thanks a lot for coming on. Now, before we start getting into the free energy stuff, tell us a bit about your background and what you were involved in and what you've done.
Well, I was born in Dublin, and I worked the first 40 years in Dublin. Qualified as a civil engineer from Trinity College, and I've worked on various projects such as river drainage, roads, buildings, and the like. I moved into computing after that and worked for the rest of my working life as a contracting engineer or systems analyst. I got interested in free energy as such, which I had never heard of, in I think it was 1985, through a program on Channel 4, which was entitled It Runs on Water. And of course the program was not that good. It gave you nothing that you could follow up on. But I managed to record the program itself and managed to freeze frame one of the patents that they were talking about. and discovered that it was written by a chap called Stanley Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R, Meyer. I then got on to the patent office and said I didn't have the full details, but there was a patent by a person called Stanley Meyer, at which point the patent person started laughing and said, "We have set so many queries about this. Let me send you a list of about 40 of his patents, and you can choose from that." So I got the list, and I ordered about 4 of them. They cost £10 each, which is quite a lot for just a few pages of paper. But working on from there, I found that there was very little information indeed on the web about free energy as such. Now, having been raised and educated in the conventional system, I had been taught all of the things that conventional science says, and unfortunately they're not correct. But anyway, I found various bits and pieces, and after some years of searching, it occurred to me that the amount of effort that I'd put in to find some reliable information had taken a long time, and it would be helpful to other people perhaps if I shared the research that I had done. So I set up a website and put the information on there, and it has proved to be fairly popular since. So that's approximately where I am at the moment.
Okay, what have you worked on? What kind of stuff have you worked on yourself at home? What have you done regarding the free energy side?
I am primarily a writer rather than a builder. I don't have a lot of physical, mechanical skills, so I've tended mainly to write. One of the things that I did do to prove the concept was I built a device which is a toroid wound with wire. It's in my ebook, and it's called Lawrence Chung's FLEET, Fleet toroid. It's a very simple variation on the Joule thief circuit running on a single transistor. Now at that point I took 2 identical 12-volt batteries, motorcycle batteries. They weren't fully charged, and I used one of them to run the circuit to charge the second battery. And after a while I swapped the batteries over, and after doing that several times, both batteries got to be fully charged, and they had a lot more actual usable power in them than when we started. And as there was no outside source of energy applied, it was a very clear indication that the energy in the system was over 1. In other words, there was more energy coming out of the circuit than was being put into it. So as far as I'm concerned, that without any question demonstrates the fact that free energy does actually exist. Mind you, there's quite a bit of controversy as to what's meant by free energy. Perhaps I could illustrate it this way. If I were offered a car for free from a car dealership, and I took a bus across to the dealership and was given this car for nothing and drove away in it, I personally would think that the car was free. Other people wouldn't say that. They would say, "Oh no, you paid a bus fare to go there. So it isn't actually free. It cost you as much as the bus fare." I don't see it that way, but everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Now, I see sunlight as being free. It arrives on its own. You don't have to pay for it. But people will say, "Oh, but sunlight doesn't constitute free energy, because if you, say, use a solar panel, it costs you a lot of money to buy a solar panel in order to use the sunlight." Well, yes, that's true, but as far as I'm concerned, buying a solar panel has nothing to do with free energy. The free energy is the sunlight, and it arrives all on its own, and you don't have to pay for it. But that's merely my attitude. Other people see it differently.
Yeah, I think we talked about this earlier when we were having a chat off air today, and a lot of people kind of get upset when you say the word free energy, and they say, "But it's not free energy; it has to come from somewhere." And as I said to you, and I think we both agreed, the word free energy is only a term of reference just to say what you're talking about. We know it has to come somewhere, but it's only a term of reference when we're talking about it. Now, we also talked earlier on about, well, before we go down to that question, what you just mentioned there, the law of physics says you can't get more out than what you put in, but what you've done is you've proved that wrong.
Yes, it's mainly a matter of concept. The general laws, if you pardon the phrase, laws of physics, are based on the assumption that you have a closed system. The only problem with that is there is no such thing in this universe. There is no closed system. To get a closed system, you would have to blank off gravity. You'd have to blank off cosmic particles. Nobody's ever found a way of doing that. You'd have to blank off all forms of electromagnetic radiation. It just doesn't happen. You can't do anything like that. The systems that we have are generally categorized by a term called the coefficient of performance, or COP for short. The coefficient of performance is the ratio of what comes out of a system as divided by the amount of energy that you personally put into it. If you take the solar panel as an example, a good solar panel nowadays is about 17% efficient. In other words, of the energy that falls in sunlight or ultraviolet onto your solar panel, only 17% of that actually comes out as electricity. But the coefficient of performance of the panel is infinity, because you don't have to put anything in. The sun does that, not you.
Yeah.
So your panel is operating at more than 100% efficiency as far as you're concerned from the energy you put in. But the actual efficiency of the panel itself is desperately low. I mean, less than a fifth, which is ridiculous.
Well, straight away you're going to get into an argument with scientists when if you turn around and say, well, I've done this experiment and I've actually got more out than what I've put in, straight away their indoctrination is going to be, you can't break the law of physics. So how would you explain that to them?
It is difficult to explain it to them, but the actual answer is, of course, that it's not a closed system. The system of two batteries and a circuit is actually immersed in a sea of energy. There is energy all over the place. I mean, Oliver Heaviside, who was the person who came up with E equals mc squared decades before Einstein publicized it, he worked out that in every cubic centimeter anywhere in the universe there was enough energy already there to create all of the matter that's visible in all of the universe. There is an enormous amount of energy all around us. But we're a bit like a fish swimming deep in an ocean with a mile of water in every direction and wondering where can it find some water. You know, we're saying, where can we get some energy? And we're absolutely immersed in the stuff. There's far more around than we could ever need.
Well, that's right. I think they say in a drop of water, the amount of energy in a drop of water is there's so much in it, and we just have to understand the actual science behind it. Now, there was a Japanese guy, a Japanese inventor, who invented magnetic motors, and the Free Energy Consortium didn't believe that he was getting more out of the motors than what he was putting in. So they flew over to Japan to have a look at this motor, and he had sold something like 40,000 of these to retail customers and businesses. And he went over, and there is a YouTube video there where you see 2 meters and what's going in and what's coming out. And they were still scratching their heads as to what was going on. But a few years later, I've seen a video, and they said they found that there's other forces going on with magnetics, which they only found out, which could be the reason why this energy was being generated.
Yes, there are several different ways of drawing energy from the environment around us. One of them is by using magnetics. Permanent magnets look as if they've got power, but they don't in actual fact have any. What they do is they channel the energy that's all around us into a particular pattern. For instance, there was a gentleman in New Zealand called Robert Adams. Now, he was an electrical engineer, quite advanced. He retired because he'd reached a fairly old age, and he produced a pulse motor. At least that's the way people saw it. In actual fact, it isn't a pulse motor. It's a motor which has got 4 permanent magnets mounted on a rotor and 4 electromagnets around the edge. And the way it operates is the electromagnets have got a soft iron core, and when you start the motor, the magnets on the rotor are attracted to the iron core, and when they reach there, he powers up the electromagnet with a very small amount of current, just enough to stop the rotor being dragged backwards again, and only for a very short period. Now, if you add extra pickup coils onto that, your typical untuned efficiency is 800%. In other words, you can get 8 times more power out than you actually put in to make it operate.
Wow.
Now, a lot of that is coming from the magnets pulling towards the iron.
Yeah.
The magnets themselves are just channeling the outside energy. If you think about it, a magnet is created with an electric pulse, which can be like 1,000th of a second. And that same magnet can hold itself up on a metal wall against the force of gravity for years and years and years. And people say, oh, but the magnet doesn't have any energy. Well, it doesn't in actual fact, but what it does is it channels outside energy. Magnets are one of the ways of producing extra power from the environment. Another method is by using voltage pulses, which are very short and very sharp. Another method is by splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen and other things, which most people don't know about, and then reconstituting them. Doing that, you can actually run a standard generator on water alone. But that's only one of the ways. Another method is by impact. The inertia of impact actually draws energy from the gravity field. And one of the videos that you'll see on the YouTube series is from James Hardy. He has a high-speed water pump, and he's built a very simple paddle wheel made, it looks to be from a bicycle wheel, with little cups attached around the edge. Just a few of them, something like 6 or 8. And he directs the jet of water at the cups, which keeps jerking the wheel around. He has the wheel then connected to an electric generator, and once it gets going, he can switch the mains power off and switch the water pump directly to the generator it's powering. And it will run itself, and it will run additional things. I think he demonstrates with a 100-watt light bulb. But it's showing that you've got self-power plus extra output. There are a whole string of ways of doing it. It's just a matter of the suppression that's been going on for a long time. The last 100 years or so, there have been vested interests who want to keep this sort of technology away from the people. And by the people, I mean ordinary people like you and me. Now, you probably are aware of Henry Ford and his Model T.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't around then, but I'm reliably informed that Henry Ford built the side panels of his Model T using a material which is grown from ordinary plants.
Hemp, I think you're...
Yes, it is hemp.
Yeah, hemp, yeah.
Hemp grows very, very fast. It's non-polluting. It's about 20 times stronger than steel. It also produces an oil, and Henry Ford was intending to run his Model T on hemp oil. But he was persuaded to use the waste product from the oil industry, which is called petroleum, to actually run his vehicle. Now, there weren't enough filling stations around in America at that time, So the engine was geared so it could run on either petroleum, which they call gasoline, or on ordinary alcohol distilled on farms. And there were something like 50,000 farms which were distilling alcohol. So if you went for a journey of any length, what you would do is you would stop off at a farm and top up your tanks with alcohol, which had been produced by fermentation in a still. Now, you also, I'm sure, have heard of Prohibition in America.
That's right, yeah.
And most people think that Prohibition was about people not drinking alcohol. And in actual fact, it had nothing whatsoever to do with that. The real reason for Prohibition was to put the 50,000 farms out of business so that petroleum could be the only fuel in America.
That's right.
And when they'd achieved that, then Prohibition was dropped. Because nobody really cared about adults drinking alcohol.
Yeah. And obviously DuPont had a hand in stopping it as well.
Yeah, indeed. All the big businesses are linked together.
Yeah, that's right. And people, when you talk to them about Prohibition, they all know about the history of not allowed alcohol, but it was purely the fact that the petroleum companies wanted to make the money, because you could run a car on alcohol and you could make your own alcohol and run a car on it, and they didn't want people doing that. So the Prohibition came in to stop people producing alcohol, to give them enough time to get petroleum and oil into the mainstream, into the mine that you need this for your vehicles.
That's right.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's definitely right. It's something that I wasn't aware of until quite recently.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, the whole idea of hemp in itself, we're going to have Ricky Simpson on the show shortly, in the next few weeks, and Ricky Simpson has used hemp to create hemp oil to cure cancer. And hemp is tougher. I mean, I would think when Henry Ford built a car out of hemp, it was stronger than aluminium, and it grew quicker. And I had hundreds of applications, but because of this, DuPont and other people decided no, that's in competition to what we're doing, so we have to sort it out. And then what they did is obviously they gave it a Mexican name, which is marijuana, to make it sound really bad, and hence, we know where we're at now today. Now, obviously, the pharmaceutical companies cannot patent the plant, so they're not interested in actually in letting people. They want to keep cannabis and hemp illegal, because at the end of the day, if people start realizing that, hey, we can use this for multiple purposes, and one of them is to heal ourselves. There is a great video on the internet out there called Granny Smokes Weed or Granny Smokes Pot. And all these old age pensioners in America are smoking cannabis, and they feel fantastic. They've never been as healthy in their life. And it was a great video to see, because people have this impression about, cannabis being a drug and it's very bad for you, very dangerous. But actually, cannabis was used up to the late 18th century for a lot of cures and a lot of things. And people don't realise that.
Yes, that's definitely true.
Now, the other thing I was going to touch base on, Patrick, was I'm an avid viewer of a program called QI, and I'm sure there's a lot of people, especially in Ireland and the UK. Stephen Fry is the host of QI, and it's quite interesting, but at the same time, there's been a few times that I've caught them out, and I thought, no, you're wrong there. And one of the times was when they turned around, and they were all having a great giggle at perpetual motion, and the fact that, it was a crazy conspiracy idea and it'd never work. Do you want to tell us what you think about that?
Well, there are certain programs that have been financed to try and discredit free energy generally. There is one called MythBusters in the States, and they decided that they would try and pick on John Bedini's pulsed motor. Now, John produced a pulsed motor which spun a flywheel. Now, as you spin a flywheel with lots of small pulses, which is what he was doing, every single pulse draws additional energy from the local environment, from the gravity field. So the actual energy coming out is greater than the energy you have to put in to run it. So John put a generator head on his particular motor. That is a disc with a whole lot of magnets on it, closely facing a disc with a whole lot of coils on it. And the magnet spinning past the coils generates electricity, and he rectified that, fed it into a capacitor, and then with a switching circuit he would switch off the drive to the motor and switch the charge power back into the battery running the motor. And that would happen automatically. Now, he ran this motor in his workshop for more than 4 years on the same single battery. Now, the Mythbusters people decided that they would debunk this, so they built their version, and their version didn't have the magnets and the pickup coil. So it just wasn't a replication in any respect. So they ran it on air and said, look, the battery's going down, it doesn't work. And that's the style of presentation that you can expect from people who are paid to debunk. That particular program, one of the people rang in and said, look, you got it wrong, and I can show you it actually working. And they said, no, we're not interested. We're only interested in showing things that don't work. So that's generally the reason why they take that approach. But as to perpetual motion, everything is in perpetual motion. There isn't anything in the universe that I've ever heard of that isn't in perpetual motion. If you look at a mountain, for instance, the mountain is made up of molecules and atoms, and in the atoms there are electrons in constant motion. Now, those electrons have been in that mountain in constant motion for millions of years, and they'd probably be there for millions more. I mean, how long does it have to go before you sort of accept the fact that this is perpetually in motion? I don't know. I don't understand why people have a problem with that.
Yeah. Well, they're conditioned, Patrick. You know, I mean, either they're conditioned and they listen to what's on the TV, because obviously they tell the truth all the time, the TV stations, and obviously they haven't done any research on it whatsoever.
No, I know that. But the thing about this is that the Patent Office will not accept, in principle, will not accept any patent that claims perpetual motion. So what you have to do when you're writing a patent, and I've done several, you have to say, this is not perpetual motion, because the components of this device will eventually wear out. Yes, it may take 50 years, but eventually they will wear out and you'll have to replace them. So it's not perpetual motion.
Yeah, it's a good way to get around it, all right.
But as far as the actual user is concerned, it works self-powered for a lifetime. Why would anybody care that it's not perpetual motion?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you know, I had a couple of ideas, and my kind of flavour of interest is permanent magnets, and using the perpetual motion idea to do that. But I'm not an engineer, and I don't have the science knowledge behind me. I know what I want to do, and I know it can be done. I just don't have the knowledge behind me. So if there's anybody out there that wants to have a go at something and pick my brain, I'll be more than happy to work with you on that one. But I'm going to go over to Steve. Steve has a couple of questions from our listeners there. So Steve, over to you.
Yeah, Patrick, good information. I'm certainly learning a lot anyway. And as is Chris. Chris writes that Patrick has a great way of looking at things. He's a great guest, and Chris is also wondering what are your thoughts on Nikola Tesla?
Nikola Tesla was probably one of the most brilliant scientists ever on this planet. He was hundreds of years ahead of his time. He introduced and invented dozens of things that people are not aware of, that he was the inventor. He came up with alternating current. He came up with neon lights. He came up with radio. He came up with electrogravitic drive, which is what UFOs use. There were whole strings of things that he came up with. But he was not very careful in his dealings with people. He intended that Henry Ford's Model T should be self-powered, and he produced a magneto that would do that. So Henry Ford could have used an electric motor, and with the magneto it would have run forever with no fuel. Now, not surprisingly, that wasn't very popular with the people in the commercial world. But Tesla himself is an absolute genius, and the things that he has come up with are absolutely tremendous. He was a little bit devious in that he built a thing called the Wardenclyffe Tower, which he said, look, this will transmit energy to all the homes. He was actually trying to con his financial people at that point, because once the aerial was up and the homes had got the receivers which could be tuned to receive the power, they would discover that they didn't need the transmitter, that the receivers tuned to receive power would power the homes themselves directly. But he didn't get away with that. They eventually destroyed the tower on the excuse, well, if it's energy transmitted to everybody, there's nowhere we can put a meter on it and charge people for it. In actual fact, an interesting thing is, I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but the generating companies, when I was in Ireland, it was called the ESB, they produce spinning magnets in generators, generally powered by a burning fuel of some description. And they produce high voltage alternating current, which they send along wires to a substation near your house. The substation is a whacking great transformer, which steps down the high voltage to a much lower voltage and steps up the current to a much higher current. That then is sent to your particular house in one of three phases and an earth. And the thing is, when you plug in something like a step-down transformer, or as people call it, a power unit, to run your CD player or video or whatever, none of the electricity that's actually generated at the power station is what flows through your equipment. The power that flows through your equipment comes from the local environment. You just don't notice the fact, because all of the current that goes to your devices goes straight back to the generating station. Not a single electron that the generating station produces is ever used in your house. So the thing is, all the generating station does is it produces a waveform that allows you to draw energy from your local environment. And the thing is, if you produce that same waveform yourself, then you don't need the generating station. And that's something that they really don't want you to know about. They definitely don't want you to know that. So they have tried to obscure every possible detail. They swear to you, as you say, you can't get more out of a system than you put in, which is not true, of course. Your solar panel proves that. For instance, if you have got a sailing yacht and you can sail around the world with no engine, no fuel, and in a lot of instances, if you do what's called the milk run and travel along the trade wind paths, you can sit idly on your boat day after day, making no sail adjustments, no trim adjustments, and travelling mile after mile after mile, doing absolutely nothing. Now, I don't see how anybody can believe that they say you can't get more energy out than you put in. I mean, if that were true, and you built a windmill or a wind-powered generator, if they were true, you would have to stand by it and turn the windmill yourself by hand in order to generate electricity. That's absolute rubbish. I mean, anybody with any sense can see that this is a load of old cobblers, if you pardon the expression.
A load of old cobblers. I love that saying. Patrick, can we just go back for 1 second? Can you explain again, maybe, for those of us down the back of the class who didn't get that, me being one of them, the electricity company send the electricity to the substation.
Yes.
The substation steps down the power, steps up the current.
Yes.
Your devices, we all have transformers and everything that we use in the home.
Yes.
They all use this, but we're not actually using anything. We're taking it from the environment.
But,
can you explain that?
But just to jump on that, when we plug in our devices, the electronics are all low voltage. So
Yes.
we use a transformer to step down the voltage which they've put up for the current.
Yes.
So
Yes, that's right.
No, but I know that they put it up because when they send it along the lines, it does drop. So that's why they have to have it very high. So that I think for every 100 feet or a couple of miles, it does drop. So that's why they have to send it to the substation. But can you just say go over that one again, Patrick?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, they use 30 or 40,000 volts because it reduces the amount of current they have to send. And it's the current flowing through the copper wires that actually wastes energy. So that's why they want to use a high voltage and a low current for sending it miles along wires. But if you are suffering from a physics course, you will be told to measure the current going into a transformer and the current coming out of the transformer on the same side. The transformer has two windings, a primary winding where you put the power in, and a secondary winding where you take the power off. Now, if you measure the primary winding, which is what's powered by the local electricity board, you will see that the current flowing into that winding is exactly the same as the current flowing out of that winding. So the current flowing out goes back to the generating station. You don't use it. So what happens on the other side? On the other side of your transformer, there's a secondary winding, and current comes out of that. Lots of current. So where does it come from? Interesting question. Now, it's not a case of it flowing backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards and not going anywhere, because you can rectify that current, turn it into DC, and you can use it so that it does not come back again. I mean, you can make it spark to earth if you want. And there's lots of current there, there's lots of power, but it is not coming directly from the power station. It's coming from the local environment. And there's plenty of it there.
Can I just interject there? If I'm getting this right, maybe I'm being a bit silly here. We know that there's the primary and the secondary, and normally you get step-down transformers and it's based on a ratio. So what you're saying is, on the primary, the power comes in and goes back out, and the secondary is not even touching the primary. It's bouncing.
That's right. That's right.
So where does the secondary get the power if it's not linked to the primary?
Now that's a very good question, which I think you should ask your local physics teacher. So it's one I've always wanted to ask them. And there isn't any answer because it comes from the environment. But they wouldn't like to answer that. Actually, the transformer is less than 100% efficient. Transformers and electric motors are deliberately wound so that they oppose themselves. This is really ridiculous. They've seen us coming. And before we were born, they had this con job going up. An ordinary electric motor is wound symmetrically. So in other words, the current that flows creates two magnetic energy fields which oppose each other. It's a bit like standing at a child's swing, but instead of standing back, you stand directly underneath the swing itself. You give it a push, the child swings forward and swings back to you, and you stop it immediately in the middle and push it back again. And people will say, look, there, it's swinging. The child's going backwards and forwards. But if you step back 2 or 3 paces and let the swing move further and push it far more gently, the child will swing much higher. It's called resonance, that particular motion. If you push it at the right time, it has a much greater effect. But as far as transformers and motors are concerned, if you wind them correctly, which is asymmetrically, so they are no longer symmetrical, then you get a great power gain. For example, there's a guy called Thane Hines, and he has a video, I think, on YouTube still, and he has wound several varieties of non-symmetrical transformers and run tests on them and made measurements. And on one of his transformers, at low power, he's putting in a certain amount of power, and he's getting nearly 40 times greater power coming out, because he has diverted the magnetic flow that normally goes back to oppose itself, so that it doesn't hinder the operation. When you take an ordinary transformer, it has been wound symmetrically, and deliberately so. That means that when you put, say, an alternating current into it, which you have to make it work, the cycle that rises in voltage from 0 to some high voltage like 220 volts and drops down to 0, when it drops down to 0, there is a reverse effect on the secondary winding which generates an equivalent magnetic pulse in the opposite direction, and the two clash, which means you have to put an awful lot of extra power into the primary to get any result out of the secondary. So what Payne Hines has done is he's arranged it so that the secondary path goes out to a third path, and he's made it very attractive to magnetic flow. So you give a push at the front, you get an output which is very high because there's no reverse flow of magnetics opposing your input. And like I say, he's measured, I think, 39.36 from memory, times the power going out as to coming in. So, you know, we've been sold a bill of goods which is just ridiculous. It really, really is silly.
I'm still thinking about where the hell does the energy come from on the second winding if it's coming in and going back out? What's going on there? I'm still thinking about that in my mind.
Right. Well, what's happened is it flows in from the environment into your secondary winding and out into your load, which could be a TV set or whatever. It
flows in from the environment?
Yes.
Right. So you're saying that in the space, so I have, let's get practical, I have a radio, right? That you get the power from the mains, right?
Right.
And what you're saying is, when I plug in my radio into the wall,
yes.
Hang on a minute, surely if the secondary winding is getting power from the environment, I shouldn't need to plug it in the first place.
Now you're talking, that's right. But what you do need to do is you need to generate a signal that looks like the mains. Now you can do that quite easily from a battery, and it doesn't have to be very powerful.
Wow, I'd like to see that experiment.
Oh, there's no problem with that.
Have you done this?
Let me put it to you this way. I have an EBook, which you can download free from my website. That EBook has got 2,500 pages. Now in it you will see photographs of this particular piece of equipment. You will have links to the web showing you where the video is, and the thing is explained in detail. Now you asked me have I built one, and the answer is no. One of the reasons being that I'm not great at building things. The other reason being that I cover several hundred things, and it would take several lifetimes to build one of each of those. It's just not feasible.
Well, I'll say something, Patrick. Our listeners are saying that this knowledge is fantastic, and they could listen to you all day. So you're really getting interest here. Now, I did see a video on YouTube a while ago, last year sometime, where a guy actually powered a TV. Now, I'm talking about a proper TV with an AA battery. Right? Now, it only lasted for a few seconds, I have to say, because the battery just went bang and it was gone. But he was proving the point that you could power the TV from the battery. I don't know if that was the same thing.
But do you also remember, sorry, just before you come in there, Patrick, I just want to throw this one back to Alan as well. Do you remember we seen the demonstration on YouTube as well, where there was a guy who had a TV set and it wasn't plugged in, but he had like a transformer, and there was something else plugged in on one side of the room, and it could actually wirelessly send power to the TV on the other side. Do you remember that one as well?
Vaguely, yeah, but yeah. No, if you remember, that's fine. Now, just get out of curiosity. Now I'm getting interested here. What kind of signal do you need?
Right. Now the thing is, I think you are not at all familiar with electronics.
Well, I have a basic understanding of electronics.
Okay. Well, one of the chapters in my ebook takes a beginner from stage 1 through to how you can design and build yourself any of the circuits that are used in these things. And it's a very simple step-by-step and very straightforward. But the point that you are making about a low-voltage battery running a TV set, 1.5 volts is not very practical, but there are standard devices quite cheaply on the market which are called inverters. And you can run, say, using a 12-volt car battery. You can run a TV for many hours directly from that. What it does is it generates an alternating signal, which is then stepped up by a transformer and arranged so that it produces 50 cycles a second at 220 volts. And that will run your television or whatever very happily. Now, I've used quite a few of those.
Well,
I find them very helpful when there's a power cut and I want to keep the fridge freezer running.
yeah, well,
The 600 watt inverter does that very nicely for me.
I agree with you on that, and this was my idea, Patrick. The idea was to use an inverter, so to use the permanent magnets to generate the initial power, and then obviously using windings or whatever way you want to step up transformer to actually put that through the inverter, so you could actually generate the power and you make a standalone unit, so you could actually carry it around, and it was self-sufficient.
Yes, it is possible. You'll find in the very first chapter of my ebook a lot of designs on using permanent magnets. Now, let me tell you that getting permanent magnets to work and drive a motor is difficult. There are a few designs that are guaranteed to do it, no problem. But generally speaking, as you can see a magnetic field, it is quite difficult to arrange it so that you're getting an evenly non-symmetrical field. To get any power, you have to have it non-symmetrical. So there are two designs in Chapter 1 which are pretty much guaranteed to give you what you want. One of them is a design from Dietmar Hohl, H-O-H-L, a German gentleman, who gives you the exact dimensions and sizes of magnets and so on. They're arranged around a cylinder in a V shape. Now, they run because there are stator magnets that oppose them, which makes the thing start moving. When it gets to the end of the V, there is a slight difficulty. It would normally stop there. Either you let it run on due to momentum, or, more sensibly, you put a second V on your cylinder, which is stepped from the first one. And when the first one comes to the end of the V, the second one's in the middle and pushing it on. So you get continuous rotation that way. There's another option, and that is very simple. If you put magnets at a 45-degree angle, the ends of the magnets have got magnetic fields which add together and push in one direction. You don't want to do more than 4 or 5 of them, because the magnetic fields get a bit complicated at that stage. But if you put 2 on each side, say 4 or 5 magnets on each side, then it will push one in the center. You'll see a video which is pointed to in Chapter 1 with some photographs which show 2 youngsters in America having a lot of fun making a magnet zoom along a wooden track with magnets on each side. And they think it's highly amusing. It is highly amusing. But the thing will zoom on like 3 feet beyond the magnets. Or for younger visitors, a meter beyond the magnets. But it is very difficult to get something like that turn round in a circle and become continuous. But what you can do is you can put 4 short tracks around at 90 degrees to each other, and that will push a magnet attached to a rotor round continuously. Now, that's a very simple technique that anyone can do, and it's just a case of buying the magnets. Magnets are not all that cheap, mind you.
Yeah, well, I think, they're not too bad for experimenting with anyway. Steve, you got a couple of questions there, do you?
Yeah, well, before I go to the question, something I've been playing around with, kind of on a very, very small scale, Patrick, is we had a load of old broken hard drives in work, and I opened up the hard drives, and we have I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, the neodymium magnets. Is that
neodymium.
Neodymium.
Yep.
And they're very, very strong. I'm guessing like any of a kind of a homebrew experimenter could use those for playing about with, couldn't they? I mean, they'd be a good starting point, and reasonably cheap, because you can get them out of all hard drives.
Yeah, actually, the hard drive is more valuable for the very high quality bearing it has. There are two main varieties of magnets. One is neodymium, which are very powerful, not too expensive, but are a lot more expensive than ferrite. The other magnets are ferrite magnets. They're not as powerful, but they have different characteristics, the two types of magnets. And some particular designs work better with the ferrite than the neodymium. But you can use either, certainly, if you want. But you need a lot of magnets to get a good motor. And because of that, it's easier to buy 10 or 20 or 30 or whatever from a single supplier. You can get them on eBay. You can get them on various electronic sites. But generally speaking, it is difficult to make your own design of magnetic motor. There is a clever way. There's one that has been produced by a very clever design where you have magnets on the rotor and you put stator magnets so that they push the magnet away, making the rotor turn round. Now the thing is, when the next magnet comes up, the stator magnet will tend to push the rotor back again, which is something you don't want. So what you do is you put your stator magnet on a lever arm, and as the rotor starts to move away, you then flip the lever arm over so that it operates on a parallel set of magnets on the further across on another rotor on the same shaft. So you just keep waggling the lever backwards and forwards to make the rotor go round forever and ever and ever. It's a very simple system. People generally use an old loudspeaker. They take the cone off and they attach the lever to the center where the cone was. And when you put a signal through that, it causes the cone to vibrate. And that wobbles the lever arm very nicely for you. You can control the rate. And that gives you a very solid motor. It's been patented by a guy called Stephen Cundell. The design is in the first chapter of the e-book. But making permanent magnet motors is not easy. One of the best ones was by Howard Johnson, and he built them and they worked brilliantly. He had 2 prototypes. Then they went to pre-production prototype it, and it wouldn't work at all. Now I'm told, I don't know if it's true, that Howard's initial prototypes were built in wood, and the pre-production prototypes, they didn't want to use wood, so they used aluminium. But they didn't seem to realize that aluminium and copper, which are supposedly non-magnetic, actually have a major effect on magnetism. And that's why their pre-production prototypes never worked. And Howard never actually got into production with it. The same thing happened on the Perendev motor. It is very, very difficult to get a production run of a permanent magnet motor. Very difficult indeed. The better way to go about it is to use electronic shielding. Charles Flynn has a brilliant motor. You put magnets onto the rotor itself, and you put magnets on the stator, and you put little coils on the stator magnets. And when you get to the point where you don't want it to attract anymore, you put a little current through it, which blocks the magnetism just for a few degrees of rotation. And Flynn found that he could get 20,000 RPM on a powerful motor using a 9-volt dry battery to power the little coils. Very powerful. It's a much easier system. If you can put a little energy into it, it makes life very much easier than trying to make it all mechanical.
I think what we're going to have to do is print out your e-book and have a read of that. There's one or two things on the topic side I want to talk about. I want Steve to go through the questions first, and then there's another area I'd like to talk about. Go ahead, Steve.
Sure.
Yeah, you want to print out the e-book? Did you? It's a couple of 1,000 pages long.
Well, yeah. Okay.
You might want to stock up on some ink first.
Okay.
But no, it's very interesting, and I've actually seen the other site as well, Patrick, with all the information on about all the different experiments and all. And I have to say, it's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. And I know someone already posted up here on the chat room that they do have the ebook there, and they're saying it's absolutely top-notch quality information.
Thank you.
We have another question here, and it's from, I think it's Shane. Shane's wondering, do you know of John Searle, and what do you think of his motor?
Yes, I do know of John Searle, and I do know of his motor. It's often referred to as the SEG. There is a document on it on my website which you can download if you want. I have nothing against it. The design is very good, and it will produce not only extra energy, but it also produces a gravitational drive, which can be used in UFOs if you wanted them. The thing is, the last time I saw him talking about it, he said that each of the magnets would cost £1 million to produce, which immediately took it out of the practical area for me. By practical I mean, pardon me, I mean something that somebody has a chance of building at home. Dr. Terry Moore produced a version himself. I haven't been following it very carefully, but I must admit that I find John Searle slightly difficult to take, but that's just a personality clash.
Yeah, just another question has sprung to mind, Patrick. The 2,500 pages of documentation that you have, and the links and the diagrams, has anyone ever, I'm guessing the answer is yes, but have you had many people say use the document, use some of your ideas, and come back to you and say yes it works, or no it doesn't work, or do you get much much feedback at all?
Yes, I get a fair bit of feedback. Not everybody who does it actually responds, but quite a few people have, and a lot of them say that they're getting brilliant results from it.
And has anyone ever suggested, say, on some of your ideas, maybe improvements, or do they just kind of follow it as is, or is there room for improvement?
The problem is that a designer or inventor will think of this thing through for probably a couple of years. He will build several prototypes. He will test out what works and what doesn't work. And then he puts forward something that he knows works. The people who are supposed to be replicating it almost never do. They go like the Mythbusters people and say, well, yeah, he does it that way, but I think it will work better if. And they build something that's quite different, which is something that the inventor will have tried and discarded because it doesn't work. And then they will discover it doesn't work. But they will say, oh, I tried it and it doesn't work. And they didn't try it, and it does work. But these are not my ideas, I must point out. This is my writing down of things that other people have discovered and designed and developed, trying to weed out the things that are not correct, and trying to explain things in a simple manner. And so we're talking about dozens of different people. Most inventors share two things in common. They have absolutely no business understanding at all, which means they can never ever get into manufacturing. And the other thing is they tend to be almost totally inarticulate. They have no chance of ever describing what they've done successfully. They're also very curious about things, so as soon as they're finished doing one particular thing, they will immediately drop it and go on to whatever next interests them. For instance, Dave Lawton produced a replication of Stan Meyer's water fuel cell, where a very small current produces a very large amount of HHO gas, mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. When I discovered that he'd done that, talking to him on the phone, his particular cell had reached his spares box because he was now interested in doing something else. And I managed to persuade him to let me write it up. And that's where the instructions have come from. And they were taken by, for instance, Ravi Ravu in India. And he did a whole series of YouTube videos where he was building and testing his replication using the Dave Lawton information. I was actually helping him directly with person-to-person emails when he was having difficulties. But he got it working nicely, and he just about finished everything he was going to do on that when he was raided by 5 carloads of people. He is a mechanical engineer with his own business, and these 5 carloads of people came in. They took his cell, they took his equipment, they took his materials, they took all his records, and they told him that he had better stop publicizing anything like this on YouTube. Interestingly, he just finished anyway, and he was moving on to magnetics. But this is the sort of treatment that people get. For instance, also Bob Boyce in America, a person I've met and know, he produced a very effective cell indeed, which was capable of producing 50 to 100 litres of HHO per second. And he was warned by Major Todd Hathaway of the US Army that he was allowed to produce boosters to improve vehicle mileage, but he was not allowed to run a car on water. Now that's an interesting thing to be told by the government, isn't it?
It is actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one of the subjects I'd like to try and move into, there's somebody on the chat facility wanted to go further down the line in advanced technology and UFO technology, but one thing I want to touch base with, Patrick, I don't know whether you know anything about this, that you're probably well aware about smart meters and the dangers of smart meters and wireless technology. Have you come across anything regarding technology to reduce or stop the smart meters from sending signals out to try and help people? Any blockers or anything like that? Have you come across that?
No, it's not the sort of thing that I would want to do. But I will tell you that the other day I was reading about one of the CloudBuster technologies. I don't know if you've come across CloudBuster technology at all.
Yeah, we had Colin on who actually promotes Orgonite, and
yes.
Wilhelm Reich, the German scientist.
Yes. Now, one of the people who found this said that if you took off the long pipes on a CloudBuster and put it underneath your electric meter, that it would clean up the electricity, and the amount of electricity used in the house, although it appeared the same, would actually not it would not need so much input of electricity from the grid. Now, nobody is cheating anything. The meter is there, there's nothing wrong with the meter, it's recording the energy flowing through it, and it's just that the quality of the electricity is being improved by this orgone generator underneath. And then the guy who actually tested it out, the electric company sent out people to replace the meter. They thought the meter was defective because his electricity bills were so low. There was nothing wrong with the meter. It's just that he had improved the quality of what was going on in his house. But I personally would prefer to move completely away from the grid if at all possible.
Yeah.
And you can do that with an ordinary electric generator if you wish. You can take some of the electricity output from the standard generator and use it to produce HHO by electrolysis of water. You can add in some cold water mist, and you can use that then to power the generator, which will run itself and some kilowatts of extra equipment. That's available and well tested. And if you don't want to bother adjusting the timing of your generator, you can get away with just bubbling the HHO through a container with some acetone in it. And that will slow down the flame speed of the HHO, and a standard generator will operate perfectly well on water alone.
Well, I've seen an experiment like that on the internet, similar to that, and also I've come across looking at a company who actually produced a device that you put in between the power coming into your house and the actual cables to the house, because they said a lot of the electricity, there's a lot of power spikes on the electricity, and this is what increases your bill because of these spikes. And what this device does, probably like an APC, a UPS, it streamlines, it takes all them spikes out of your power, reducing the cost, the overall cost. Now that kind of sounds similar to what you're talking about.
Yes, that's true. I also have a friend who is working on a commercial transformer, which is non-symmetrical. And if you use that, then it will cut the amount of power you need to power your home by an enormous factor, probably 10 or 20 times.
There is another thing that's going on, which I'm not going to talk about because it's in testing at the moment. But when we get the approval to talk about it, we will obviously mention it on the show. But we can't say at the moment because there's people testing it with on the grid, so to speak. But Steve, you've got questions there. There's a few questions coming in.
You're
there.
wetting the whistle there, wetting the appetite.
I am. Well, it's something that I was told by a good friend of ours, and people are experimenting with it at the moment. So that's as far as we can go with that. But we can talk to Patrick off air about it. I don't mind doing it off air, but we can't say it on air at the moment.
Right, okay, Mr. Cryptic.
The money's in the...
Yeah. Right, Patrick, in relation to, say, what you've published in your 2,500 pages and the information that you're basically compiling and you're putting out there for people to use, have you ever been threatened in any way? Has anyone ever tried to silence you?
This is something that bothers me quite a lot. They have mainly ignored me. They've managed to destroy and lock me out of about 6 websites, but they were free websites, and they haven't managed to upset any of my paid-for websites as such.
Yeah.
As I'm old and decrepit, I've passed my website over to a much younger Dutch guy, and the website is now mainly supported on his server, so that if I'm not around, he will ensure that it keeps going. But I have got 3 or 4 free energy servers that have been running for years, and they've probably connected with maybe 4 million people, something like that. But it does bother me to a certain extent that very little has been done against me. I've been locked out of various sites like China and places like that. But that's only a temporary measure, and the people there always seem to get around it. Besides which, I've got a guy who's doing Chinese translation of the stuff anyway, so he has all the information, and he can put it out locally, which he is doing. And there's actually quite a large group of people in China working on it, actually building and experimenting with things. And another very popular place is Russia. The guys in Russia are brilliant. They have very few resources, but they do an awful lot of work and development, and they progress very well indeed.
Excellent stuff. Well, at least you're still around. You're obviously you're getting blocked from websites, but at least your life hasn't been threatened, which is good. So long may it continue. Next question. Sorry, go ahead.
I said thank you.
Oh, yeah. Next question. This is something we came across. I think it must be about 2 years ago. And like everything, it's on the long finger, and I'll eventually look into it someday. But have you heard of the hydroxy booster for your car? It's supposed to save 30% on fuel, and it costs about €60 to build. It's a question came in here from Shane, and it was come into my mind earlier when you were talking about bubbling of hydrogen. I remember there's some one part of this hydroxy booster is hydrogen bubbles, and it's a mad looking device. But have you heard of that?
Yes, chapter 10 explains exactly how they work, how you make them, and shows you about 6 different designs. They're very simple to make. You can make them from electric wall plates and nuts and bolts, and they're very, very straightforward. The thing that you have to deal with usually is the control that's been built into the car. It's called the Electronic Control Unit, or ECU, and it has a fuel monitoring system to control the injection of fuel. Now, if you thump in an awful lot of HHO, or hydroxy as some people call it, then it'll work nicely and drop your mileage considerably. But after a while, the ECU is liable to decide that there's something wrong and it'll start pumping more fuel in again. So ideally what you want to do is you want to control the way that the ECU gets its signals fed to it from the devices in the exhaust pipe. So the lambda sensor, as it's called, sends out a signal. But one of my documents shows you how you can control that very simply and make sure that you get improved mileage for a long time. One of the ways of dealing with it actually is to use a very, very simple booster which only produces about half a litre a minute. Now that low level improves the quality of the burn inside the engine, so you extract a lot more energy from the fuel, whether it's diesel or whether it's petrol, and that will give you significant increases. The guys in America have got a very raw deal. Their vehicles have been jacked up. The engine sizes there are typically 5 litres, which is ridiculous. They're also very low powered because they have deliberately got the cam timing misplaced by about 10 degrees to make it burn and waste fuel. But the guy who produced a very simple design called the Hotsabi booster produces about half a litre a minute, and he has found it's given him 50% improvement on about 5 or 6 different cars, his own and his friends. Now these are big 5-litre cars, but the vehicles in America are ridiculous. They really are.
Well, they have the gas over there, don't they? They so they can afford to have it quite reasonable to have 5-6 litre engine cars.
But the 5 or 6 litre engine cars are giving them like 6 miles a gallon.
Yeah, that's just madness, isn't it? It really
is. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, there was one guy working in one of the car firms there, and as he was going home one evening, he saw that they had a test engine on a test bed, and they had a monitored amount of fuel in a container, and the readout was showing 242 point something. He said, what's that mean? And they said, oh, that's the miles per gallon. He said, you've got to be kidding. And they said, no, it's quite right. It's about 242 miles a gallon at the moment. We tested on. He came back the next morning. It was still running on the same little fuel container, and it was still showing 240 plus miles per US gallon, which is 20% smaller than our gallon. And he said, when can we expect to see a car with this in it? And they said, well, you never will. We can do it, but we're not going to actually sell it. This is the attitude they have.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a program out there that people aren't aware of called Who Killed the Electric Car?
Yes.
Which is a great program about, years ago they had electric engines. And Phyllis Diller, who's an actress, Hollywood actress, talks about it. She said she remembers these electric cars. And I'm sure if you're old enough and remember the milkman dropping the milk off at your house, and in the morning you hear the old electric motor as he drives to house, dropping off the milk. So
That's right.
We had electric cars, but obviously the petrol industry, the oligarchs of them companies wanted to sell the oil, and electric wasn't good. And I believe they had the Tesla cars, which GM had out on lease, and people wanted to buy them, and they wouldn't let them buy them, and they took them away from them, and they crushed them because they were too efficient. And this is the problem that we have out there. The technology is out there, and yet it's been restricted or stopped. We've been stopped from using it because of this. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about power for your house and being self-sufficient, Patrick, is we know that the Earth is a big battery. Is there any way that you can? Do you have anything in your plans where you can use the Earth to get the ampage to actually power your house away on off the grid?
It is possible, yes, but it's not necessarily a very effective way of doing it. There are quite a number of ways, but at the moment probably the easiest way is to use a generator and water, because that's simple, straightforward, easily understood. The Earth has got a magnetic field which oscillates, you can pick it up and get useful power from it by winding a coil. But the power in the coil from the Earth's magnetic field depends on the diameter of the coil. So you really need to wind one that's like 3 or 4 feet in diameter.
Wow.
In other words, over a meter, typically, in diameter. That takes a lot of wire.
Yeah.
And wire is quite expensive at the moment. And will continue to be. It's also big and unwieldy. So I don't think that's a very good method of actually producing power for your house.
Well, I've seen designs in PDF documents using plates put in the ground, and the amount of plates that you put in will determine how much power you get from it.
Yes, that's true, but the amount of power is very small. The voltage is very low. The amount of current is very, very low. There are designs in my particular ebook where, for instance, there's a design which was patented by Carlos Benitez, and he uses 2 batteries. One he uses to power his circuit. The circuit generates enough power to charge an identical battery while providing 2 kilowatts of additional power. And when the battery gets run down, he just switches over. Now, obviously, he was doing this a long time ago, and he's using mechanical switching. If you use solid-state switching, and instead of waiting a couple of hours before switching the batteries over, if you switch them over every few seconds, then you only need a very small battery. And that will give you continuous, usable, sizable power forever and ever, no cost.
Okay, and what about deep cell marine batteries? Apparently they're supposed to be very good.
Yes, indeed. Batteries can be very useful. The problem is most of the charging circuits for batteries have got a requirement that you can only charge one battery when you're using another one to power the circuit.
Yeah.
It's not the only way. I mean, there's a guy who's used Bob Boyce's toroidal system, and he has a little girl who has got a miniature car powered by a car battery. And she drives around during the day in this car, enjoying herself. And when she's gone to bed at night, her dad connects a circuit to the battery to power his circuit, and then uses that same circuit to charge the battery overnight. And he's done that at least 30 times. So the little girl drives around, and the almost exhausted battery is then used to charge itself overnight. Now that's an interesting system, and if you ask a professor in physics, he will assure you that's impossible.
Yeah, well, they've been indoctrinated, you know.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's of interest for a lot of people. This, you know, today, with the way things are and the cost, the more you can get away from the grid, the more you can get away from the system and be self-sufficient, the better. So that's why probably there is we have a big interest in the energy, and not only like, cars and using the Stanley Meyer solution, but other solutions as well. But it is amazing that if you could find a way. I mean, the generator idea, which I thought was good, having a transfer switch in your house where you can switch over from the grid over to a generator, and then if you could set up the generator in a way where you can use water or use some kind of solution energy to power the generator, then you'd be completely off the grid.
That is true. Yes, you can. The problem with that, of course, is that your generator will eventually wear out. And I pointed that out to a guy in America. He said, that doesn't matter. If I were to buy a new generator, it will cost me $600. I would still win hands down on my electricity bill if I replaced the generator completely every single year.
Wow. Yeah.
But, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's just Steve, do you have any questions there that have come in?
Yes, I do. There's a question now. It came in there a while ago, but there was no kind of opportune moment to throw it into the mix, Patrick. But it comes in from Chris. Chris said early on in the interview, you mentioned UFOs a couple of times, and he says, without changing the subject too much, do you have any information on UFOs. Do you know much about them?
I do know a certain degree about them, yes. The Black Ops section in the USA has been channeling off funds for the best part of 100 years now. They have developed, in conjunction with the USSR and Canada and the UK, what we would describe as flying saucers. There's nothing very wonderful about them. What they're doing is they generate an electrogravitic field which is stronger than the gravity of the Earth, and that makes the particular vehicle move in whatever direction you want, and typically however fast you want, and it doesn't take much in the way of energy to do it. The power of gravity is 10 to the power 39 times weaker than electromagnetism. Now, 10 to the power 39 is a fancy way of saying 1 followed by 39 zeros. It is billions of billions of billions times weaker. The gravity is weaker by that sort of factor. It doesn't take much in the way of energy if you know how to actually lift a particular vehicle off the ground and fly it through space pretty much indefinitely. Nikola Tesla produced one which I understand was about the size of a washing machine. It doesn't have to be aerodynamic. It doesn't have to be any particular shape. And I understand he flew it at night time just for his own amusement.
Wow.
He was a slick guy.
What? Not a washing machine.
That's obviously why. Did you ever open the washing machine and you look inside? There's a concrete block
That's
inside.
it. That's all. Yeah.
That's obviously why they're there, to stop them from flying.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
You don't think perhaps it might be to dampen down vibration
Yeah.
when the washing load is uneven?
Yeah.
No, I'd say it's to stop them from flying. There's obviously technology.
Right, okay.
No free energy there. It's just flying about. I was going to say that about the technology that they have. The other thing that they used in early UFO technology was the Coanda effect, about sucking the air in from the top and then blowing it out down the bottom. But the one thing, I was watching a program about Stephen Greer. He was talking and he said as soon as they found that they could control gravity, everything in the early 50s, everything went black.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely so. And it's even been noted that a very large flying saucer was seen coming out of a concealed entrance in the States, and painted on it was both USA and USSR. This is some years back. They were working together on the project. They are not, and really never have been, enemies as such. This is all just make-believe.
Yeah.
To give some reason for what's supposed to be a Cold War.
Yeah.
And to spin a lot of money out on the basis of that.
Now, you said something to me, Patrick, earlier on, which I'm just going to say. You said that the technology they have, what you see on Star Trek, is what they have.
Yes, they have everything that Star Trek ever portrayed. The one faction of the New World Order, which owns the patent offices around the world, are somewhere between 100 and 1,000 years ahead in technology over what's made public today.
Can you imagine that?
Jesus.
Now, I have heard this also, that, on Star Trek they have the replicators.
Yeah.
Where they can replicate stuff. Now, they actually have that technology, apparently, what I heard through my research. Now, the holodeck, that would be phenomenal if they had a holodeck. Do you think so?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But then again, to take a step further, are we on a holodeck? Are we in the Matrix?
Well, there you go. We probably are in the Matrix. I think we probably are. Where do you think it's going to go, Patrick? Because obviously there's a lot going on at the moment. I was looking at that video. I don't know whether I mentioned it last week, or maybe it was... but if you go to YouTube and type Jesse Ventura and look at the Skinwalker Ranch, there's this guy called Bigelow, who's a billionaire, and he's building like a hotel in space. Basically because he feels that something is going to happen to the planet, and he wants to be off the planet before it does happen. What do you think is going to happen? Do you have any idea what you might, with your research, what you think might happen to the planet?
There are a lot of different opinions, obviously, and it is nearly impossible to work out which of them are sound and which are not. One of the things that struck me early on is the information on Planet X, or goes by a whole string of different names. It's supposedly a planet which has been captured by the sun and is going around in the opposite direction to the other planets and at a very steep angle to them in an orbit that goes round for about 3,600 years. It's possible, but in my opinion, most of that is being put out to distract us and make us get worried and do things which are not related to paying attention to what's going on around us. So I think most of it is misdirection. But then what do I know about it? I mean, I have no proof one way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. We can only look at what we can find out on the internet and talk to people. And, you know, as we were told by a certain person on the inside, there is a certain person out there in the ufology field that is being told to scaremonger.
Yes.
You know, and I'm sure there's a few people, truthers out there, or people who are in it, not for getting the truth out there, but they're out there, they're either shills, trolls, or they're just to upset the apple cart. So, you have to be very careful with the information, and you have to cross-reference as much as you can.
Yes, I did a write-up in my ebook on this particular planet, and after a few days I took it back out again, because I wasn't sure that it was true by any means. Now, the most sound information that I could get on it was that the actual device had come into the solar system already, had passed by Uranus, and was orbiting to come back around the Sun. And the prediction was that it would come in December 2012, and its closest point of approach would be between the Sun and the Earth in March 2013. It didn't happen. I'm glad that I took it back out again. I don't think it's relevant, quite honestly. If it does come, we all have a major problem. So there's not much you can do about it. I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I don't think even because there are people out there prepping and stuff, and so unless you have an underground base, forget about it. It's not going to happen. Patrick, if you wanted, for our listeners, what if they want to start looking at free energy stuff and on ways to experiment, where would you point them? Where would you tell them to go? I mean, your ebook is going to be, you know, point number one, to go to the website and download your ebook, because I'm sure it's packed with information. What other resources would you tell them to go to?
Well, my ebook is only about 5% of the information on my website. People who go into looking at free energy inevitably end up with two additional subjects. One of them is health, and the fact that cancer cures have been suppressed over and over again, it doesn't sit well with people who are honest. And we do not appreciate the pharmaceutical industry not wishing to cure people, but wishing to sell them drugs forever and ever. The other area that does bother people is the area of things like taxation, which when you look into it, you discover that you are being subjected to what is effectively a protection racket. People who are saying, you must do this, if you don't, we'll use violence against you. That's something that struck me quite strongly when I was in my teens, and I decided that this was a situation that was being enforced by violence, and there wasn't any way out of it. I'm not absolutely sure now that there is no way out of it, but the situation is that there is the law, which can be summarized very simply in that you must not injure or kill anyone, you must not destroy, damage, or steal their property, and you must be honest in your dealings. Now that sums the entire law up concisely. But there is another outfit which is running a con job on us. It's called the Law Society, which is a private organization. They've dreamt up a whole series of regulations for their own members. But they're then trying to con us that we have to obey these regulations as well. And because we know so little about it, we actually believe their lies. And there is absolutely no reason why we should pay tax. There is no law that says you should pay tax at all. The outfit that produces these regulations calls them laws. They are not laws. They're just regulations of a private society. You see speed limits on the road. The speed limits are part of those regulations. You are not bound to keep speed limits. You're not bound to park in a particular place. You're not bound to pay a fine if somebody says you're parked in the wrong place or you stayed too long or whatever. And these things are complete con jobs. And when a bank supposedly lends you money to buy a house, they don't actually. They are running another con job. All that they lend you is a couple of zeros in your bank account. And you then con builders by giving them worthless ones and zeros. And they build a house. Then the bank says you got to pay them back real money instead of the fake money that they gave you. And this is where the crunch comes. They will take from you more than 80% of everything you earn. If you're a long-term saver, they have it fixed that inflation will eat 90% of your savings. You are being conned left, right and centre, and it's not something that we really appreciate. But I think we're getting a bit off topic here.
Well, no, I it's all kind of interrelated to a certain extent. I know it doesn't involve with free energy, but we know where you're going from. Well, going to with that. But we have about another 7 or 8 minutes there, Patrick. I'd just like to touch base with you just on something that you mentioned regarding the ChemBusters and the pipes for reducing the energy. Can you just touch base on that again?
It's not a subject that I'm particularly familiar with, but the energy field that the Earth sits in is sometimes described as orgone. And there are various things that concentrate it. For instance, there's the Joe cell. A friend of mine called Bill Williams in the USA experimented with the Joe cell. He built one and put it in his Ford pickup truck. And the thing took off like a racing vehicle. He has it connected to the carburetor on his particular petrol-driven truck. And he drove around for some months doing forestry work, backwards and forwards, quite a big mileage. At the end of that time, he discovered that although the engine was quite capable of pulling in gasoline, as he calls it, it hadn't done it. He had effectively driven round for long distances without using any visible fuel at all. That's because the Joe cell takes the local energy and channels it into the engine. It takes a while to get the vehicle adjusted to that, but it is perfectly feasible to do it. You may be interested to know that he was then approached by 2 armed thugs who gave him a dossier 2 inches thick in which there were photographs and details of every member of his family, where they would be, what they did, and they said, if you don't stop doing this and destroy this cell, we will kill your family. And he initially resisted them, but he has now given up and he's destroyed his cell. He doesn't talk about it anymore. But that's a standard technique used against people who know what's going on. Now the CloudBuster technology is like the Joe cell. It channels the local energy field, and it can be used to alter weather, and it can be used for healing, and it can be used for a lot of useful things. There is a system called HAARP, which is being used by several countries to intimidate each other. HAARP equipment can cause hurricanes, can steer hurricanes, can create earthquakes, can create tsunamis. And there's a lot of posturing and threatening between the countries, and they do this to each other to show that they can do it. But the CloudBuster technology does allow weather control as such. I did have in my EBook a simple device that you could build that could affect clouds and weather up to 1,000 miles away. But I took it out again because it needs to be used by people who are responsible and not necessarily for their own use. The group of people who are using that technology use it to steer dangerous hurricanes away from populated areas. They're quite successful at doing that. They saved an awful lot of lives by doing it. But one of the ways of doing it is with a device which has got several long metal pipes sticking out of it, and an earth lead that ideally goes into flowing water. But that is what was used on the electricity meter. Remove the long pipes, leaving pipes only, a few inches long, 10 inches maybe, half a dozen, maybe 8 pipes in a container, and just stuck that underneath the meter, which was an outdoor meter. And the people who replaced the meter could see it, obviously, and discounted it because it didn't do anything. It's just sitting there.
So, can I just clarify that? You make a ChemBuster and you put it on just beside where the meter is, underneath the meter.
Yeah, you aim it at it.
You aim it at it, and then that's... Wow, that would be a good experiment. Now, we've had Colin, I'm just watching the time here, but we had Colin on who made ChemBusters, and he did gifting organic orgonite stones. Maybe they're organic orgonite stones. And he did gifted these around telephone masts, but every time he went to do the ChemBuster, there was always a helicopter all of a sudden would appear out of nowhere.
Yes.
And this has been reported a number of times with people making ChemBusters and helicopters turning up.
Yeah, that's because they can detect the effect. They remember, channel this energy for their UFO type flying vehicles.
Yeah.
They have detectors and operate it, and they watch what's going on. This is one of the ways that they discover inventors who are effectively dangerous to them. They can see the effect.
That's incredible. See, they get you every way, don't they? They really do. They can kind of suss it up. But, I still think, people should go off and do it. I mean, if that helps your energy, or you can actually build ChemBusters to get rid of the chemtrails, because the chemtrails are getting worse these days. I don't know whether you've noticed that, Patrick.
I have never actually seen what I would describe as a chemtrail. But then, remember, I'm near the headquarters of the NWO. But the thing that you need to realize, I'm talking about cloudbusters. You're talking about ChemBusters. They may be the same thing, I don't know. I don't know how a ChemBuster is actually built.
Yeah, I think they probably would be. Okay, well listen, Patrick, we've reached that time of the evening. It's been fantastic information. I know the listeners have really enjoyed the information. I think we're going to have to do a part 2 in a few weeks' time. Would you be up for a part 2?
Yes, I have no problem with that. You asked for another site. Another site is Rex Research.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pass you over to Steve, and Steve's going to get all your information off you there. I'll have a chat with you there. Thanks again on my behalf, and I'm sure the listeners are the same. But over to you, Steve, if you want to do the roundup with Patrick.
Yeah, just a quick question has just literally come in, Patrick, about the CloudBuster technology, using it on the electricity meter. Howie is wondering, would it also work for gas meters as well?
I have no idea, I must admit. Absolutely no idea. I think it's unlikely. The improvement in electricity is because it's cleaning up the electrical supply. And you don't need to clean up a gas supply.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And sorry, just before you go, it's been absolutely mind-blowing information. Very interesting. And I was looking at your other website earlier, which I found it basically covers a lot of the information that we will talk about here on OYM and have spoke about for a long time, and that is yourstrawman.com. Very, very brilliantly put together website there. Loads of information, all just there for the taking. But Patrick, before you go, can you just maybe give us out your websites there again, and if you have a YouTube channel or any other way where our listeners can find out more about you and your work?
I don't generally publicise Patrick Kelly as such. I publicise free energy and related subjects like health and the swindles that have been perpetrated in the financial area. The main website now is www.free-energy.com. energy, ENERGY, hyphen, info, INFO, dot, TUKS.NL. That's the full website nowadays.
And that's the one that you say is done for you.
That's in Holland, yeah.
Yeah.
Now the thing is, it has lots of pointers to other websites. It has probably 50 pointers. The same on the Your Strawman website. It has got lots of pointers elsewhere. You can research further on either site.
And what's the other one you were going to mention there, Rex Research?
It's one of the pointers on the free energy site.
Excellent.
It's a very large site. It's got about 3 gigabytes of information on it. It's run by one gentleman. It appears somewhat disorganized, but the amount of information on is absolutely phenomenal.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Okay, Patrick. Well, listen, stay with us there for a minute, Patrick. We're just going to go to a quick musical break. We'll be back after this.
Right.
A little bit of Bono there. He still hasn't found what he's looking for. I don't know. World domination, I think that's what he wants.
Must be his tax certificate, because he hasn't paid tax for a long time.
Well, not in Ireland anyway.
Have you, Bono? Right, okay, well that was Patrick Kelly. Fantastic information from Patrick, we have to say. We've asked him to come back on in a few weeks' time because I don't know about you guys, but I was getting really interested in the technical side of what he was talking about there, and I'm sure there's a few people on the chat room who are doing the same thing, talking more about free energy. I'm going to have a look at his book, I think, and have a flick through. I mean, I won't be reading 2,500 pages, but definitely have a flick through, I think.
I hear you say you won't be reading it, but I guarantee you'll start reading it, and before you know it, you'll be ringing me during the week. I've read 2,500 pages.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. And then to print it out, no, we don't have that much ink, I'm afraid. I won't be able to do that. It'd be good as probably a video, if we could make it as a YouTube video. If Patrick could do that, it'd be fantastic. But there you go, another show in the bag, and hopefully next week, fingers crossed, we'll have Bill Maloney. Now, I will contact Bill during the week and see if we can sort something out, getting him on the show, and hopefully we'll get him on next week. But that's the plan of attack. Now, as I said, a couple of people that we're planning to have on, Ricky Simpson's going to be on. We're finalising Abby Martin from Russia Today, and I was in contact with Claire Daly TD, and fingers crossed, we're going to try and organise for Claire Daly to come on the show as well. Fingers crossed. She's a very busy woman at the moment, and if we can get her on, then we can really have a talk to her about what's going on and get her thoughts on that. But what have you planned for the week, Steve? Anything interesting?
Well, what I've planned for the week is pretty much the same as last week. If the weather stays as it is, then I'll be doing a lot more sitting on my backside outdoors of an evening. Well, obviously I'll be working during the day, but I'll be kind of just taking it easy, sitting outside and catching up on some of the links. And I have been communicating through Facebook, I suppose, with Tony Rochford. So I'm going to be just getting an update on what he has planned for the future. So hopefully next week, I should have some more news on that.
Brilliant. Now, just a reminder, guys, donations are very important, because even if it's €1, €2, €3, it's a big help to us, because it just helps keep OYM on the air. So if you can afford €1 or €2, €3, and click on the donate button on the left hand side, and if you can donate, that'd be fantastic. If not, if there's an ad on the website, just click on the ad. We get a few cents for that. That would be great if you could do that, because every little bit helps. Trust me, every little bit helps. And it just goes to help improve the equipment that we have and pay for the likes of Skype and stuff like that, or whatever service we're using to get guests on. So if you can do that, that'd be fantastic. Now, the other thing is, it's left my mind. It'll come back to me in a minute. I was just going to say something, but about next week, I think.
You weren't going to mention the I seen it there on that page there. That hasn't passed. No, it hasn't passed. Was the contact in the desert by any chance?
You can quickly say that if you want. Yeah.
I can quickly say that if I like. Yeah, Dr. Carol Rosin, as I have mentioned, contact in the desert Joshua Tree Retreat Centre, the 9th to the 11th of August of this year. It's a week of exploration into ancient alien human origins, UFO sightings, and the need to know. You can watch the meteor shower through a clear desert sky. That event's going to be featuring George Nuri from Coast to Coast. Also Stephen Greer and Graham Hancock, Jim Mars, not Johnny Mars, I always say. And for more, so that's a contactindethedesert.net if you have a few bob. then maybe you can hop on a plane and pop along to that.
Exactly. Now,
You won't see us there.
on the chat facility, people asked us when we're going to get Alan Watts on. Well, we did plan to have Alan on the show, and we explained in the chat facility why Alan didn't come on the show. And it was basically, without going into too much detail, somebody in the truth movement who has Alan's ear obviously said that we obviously talk about certain subjects like, UFOs. Well, we are called Open Your Mind, and we look at everything. And maybe, well, this is just our own, we're just summing, get our own belief as to what we feel went down, because then Alan decided not to come on the show. And we feel that maybe that's probably because of what happened, because obviously this person said something. But we are Open Your Mind, and we look at all subjects. We cover all subjects. We question all subjects. We just don't believe them. We question them. And we say to everybody to question. So, yes, we'd like Alan to come on the show. And if you can spare the time, send an email to Alan and just say, listen, we want to hear you on OYM. Will you please go on OYM? And, that would be great if you could do that. And then if Alan can come on, then we'll be happy to do an interview with him. That would be fantastic. But we are looking for, other guests, getting other guests on, getting the information out there, and just exploring all different areas. That's what we do. And we try our best to get good guests on, and a varied list of guests as much as we can, because everybody has different interests. But Alan would be good to get on the show and have a chat with him. So, if you can spare the time, send an email to Alan Watt. Just Google his website there and just ask him to come on OYM. That would be fantastic.
And so say all of us.
So say all of us.
Yeah, if you're interested, just fire them off. If you know anyone who might be interested, send us an email and send them an email. We're always looking for interesting guests. We like to mix it up. It can kind of get a bit tedious if you have the same kind of people on all the time singing from the same hymn sheet. So, we're always up for a little bit of controversy and, maybe guests who are, kind of way off to the left or way off to the right, or, not exactly on dead centre, because, we like a bit of a challenge too.
And definitely, and whistleblowers as well.
All sorts of musicians.
Team whistleblowers. We need people, there has to be an awful lot going on out there, and nobody's saying anything. So, if you know somebody who's working in an area and wants to come on, or even be, we don't have to give a name and we can disguise their voice, but they want to report. that guy that was in on the DDI meeting, who stood up and said he worked for Fianna Fáil, and when he got involved in doing the book work, and seeing the corruption in Fianna Fáil, he left within 48 hours. After all them years working in Fianna Fáil, when he got to the level of being able to see the bookwork and the corruption involved, he left within 48 hours. So we need people like that to come out to tell us what's going on.
And Mr. Snowden, if you're listening, give us a call.
Yeah, just don't come to Ireland, because then the Kenny's going to hang you. But okay, it's nearing that time. I don't know who's on MSI Radio after, but I'm sure it's going to be great information.
It's Vin.
It's Vin.
Vin, the one and only.
Okay, good, and I'm sure the information is going to be good. But for myself, I'll just say we have a listener in. We have a third person in the studio here. It's my dad, who decided to come in and he wanted to have a listen to the show. So he's sitting here with a pair of headphones on.
Yeah.
And tuning in. What do you think of the show?
Great.
Good.
My show would be spiritual.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Alan's dad is here to make sure Alan's doing it right.
Yeah, okay. No worries. Okay, so for myself, Alan James, have a good week. Enjoy the weather and stay safe. We'll catch you later. We'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.
And from myself, Stephen George, we'll do it again in 7 days. Take care. Bye-bye.